Good afternoon, everybody. So we have come to the third interesting session on managing labor in labor-intensive industry. So we have with us. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, Soma, we can hear you.
Am I audible? Okay.
Yeah, very much.
We are audible.
Yes,
Hello?
I could hear Mr. Shakkoshen. I think you
Okay.
are audible. I believe we are on.
That's
we are
fine.
on the field. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
check mine audio.
yes,
Justice
Justice, you're
Bashak
also
is-
audible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the slight delay because the previous session was also going on. They also started a bit late, hence they had to go on for some time. So our session, that is managing labor-intensive industry sectors in post-COVID period. We have with us Mr. Shubhajit Roy. He's from Victor Moses, a partner from Victor Moses and Company. Mr. Shakkoshen, he is the moderator, and he's an advocate from High Court, Calcutta. Justice Debanshu Boshak, Mr. Jishnu Shaha, senior advocate, High Court. Dr. Krishna Nirmalo Sen, head of EHS at L&T MMH, and Mr. Prabal Mahapatra, head legal of Tata Consumer Products. So this is our interesting panel, which is a mix of legal as well as industry. So I would request Mr. Shubhajit Rai to briefly introduce the theme, and then we will move on with the session.
I shall not be long. Justice Bashak will deliver the keynote address, and we have to convey to him extreme thanks and gratitude for having agreed to privilege us with his presence at this event. The event, the topic for the event today is extremely relevant, both in the legal circles as well as for the industry, because litigation, contract drafting relating to industrial relations and labor are both issues which are confronting the industry very much in the post-lockdown period. The industry is also reeling with many do's and don'ts. There are pay cuts, there are contemplations of job losses with the recession staring at us, and also a serious issue of migrant labor posing a lot of controversies in the recent past. These will be the issues, particularly in the light of the legislations that we have. It will be very interesting to know from our distinguished panelists the extent the law covers this situation that we are faced with today, and to what extent the future will require certain amendments, certain changes, and certain adaptations, so that this issue of labor can be won over, so that it is no longer an issue that confronts the management and the ownership and the labor force, so that there can be a harmonious resolution for a broader economic growth and a more equitable and fast resolution of legal disputes that may arise from the process. I shall request Mr. Shakkoshen, moderator of the event, to kindly take on the proceedings. Mr. Shakkoshen himself is a very distinguished lawyer of our High Court, and he has had a splendid career of practice. He is still on the rise, and we have many expectations from him. And Mr. Shakkoshen, in addition to being a fine lawyer, he's also an excellent speaker. I'm setting the stage now for Mr. Shakkoshen to kindly take it forward. Mr. Shakkoshen's audio feed is muted. If you can kindly, sir, unmute it. Yes, I believe now it will be better. Your audio feed is coming muted. Yes.
Is it right?
Yes, Mr. Shakushan, we can hear you now. Thank you so much, sir.
It is my privilege to be the moderator for today's discussion, where two very eminent and distinguished members, each from the legal fraternity and the corporate sector, are here to exchange their views on the topic, managing labor-intensive industry sectors in the post-COVID-19 scenario. The organizers for the meet has chosen a topic which is just apt for the situation. And if I may use a single word to describe the situation, we are all in a helpless situation. A virus has changed our life, the way we used to lead our life, the way we used to think ahead. Now everything has undergone a change. All of us are grappling for a single question. When will this virus vanish, if at all, and how? And whether our sufferings will come to an end. Over 1.3 billion population of our country had been under complete lockdown for the more than last 3 months and presently undergoing unlock phase of the lockdown. This word is also a coined word arising out of the pandemic created by this virus. Lockdown is a word which is now known to the entire population of this country, be it the literate segment or the more particularly the illiterate segment. They also know what a lockdown is. The measure initiated by the central government to stem the spread of the deadly virus, which has claimed more than 12,000 lives in this country. The effect of this virus has been felt by one and all. The industries, the agricultural sector, the commercial sector, the unorganized sector, the salaried class, even the housewives, and last but not the least, the students. India is a labor-intensive economy, and all sectors of our economy, be it the civil engineering sector or the electronic sector, the IT sector, the agro-based industries, the food processing industries, all the industries have suffered to such an extent that their existence and survival is at stake. The crisis has already transformed into an economic and labor market shock, impacting not only the supply, production of goods and services, but also demand, consumption and investment. Disruptions in our production capacity has affected the supply chains all over. All business, regardless of size, are facing serious challenges with real threat of significant decline in revenue, insolvencies and job losses in the specific sectors. Factories and the manufacturing units have been all shut down for more than 3 months. The workforce ordinarily employed there have been displaced of employment. And thus, we have again come to know of a new expression, the expression of the migrant workers. Workers were always known to us, they are the driving force of the industry, they are the heart of the industry. But now, because of this lockdown phase, they being out of employment, they were driven to a situation where their survival and sustenance were at stake, and they were thus compelled to migrate from the place of their employment to the place where they originally belonged. All of us here have felt the sufferings suffered by the migrant workers and the pain felt by all of them. This has also affected the daily wage earners. The daily wage earners dependent on their daily wage for their sustenance. Due to this lockdown, they have also been affected. Small and medium workshops supplying components to manufacturing units also closed down, and their workforce also found themselves out of work. Soon after the advent of the lockdown, the Ministry of Home Affairs issued an order on the 29th of March 2020, directing the authorities of the states and the Union Territory to issue necessary orders and directions upon the law enforcement agencies to ensure that the employers make payment of the wages to the workforce without any deduction whatsoever during the period of the lockdown, even when the manufacturing units were shut down. This order was subsequently withdrawn. However, the legality, efficacy of this order is now presently sub judice before the Honorable Supreme Court. Supreme Court, by the last order, has adopted a conciliatory approach and said that for the time being, coercive measures need not be adopted. Many of the states Some of the state governments have also come out with ordinances and notifications exempting compliance with certain labor laws with a view to give more flexibility to the business and employers to overcome the effect of the COVID-19 mandated lockdown. Labor laws provide social security measures for the workers. So a question will obviously arise as to whether the steps taken to benefit the industry may work out prejudicially for the interest of the labor force, who are, after all, the driving force of the industry. These measures, though directed at boosting the economy, should not have the effect of operating prejudicially against the interest of the workforce. Governments, both at the center and the state, therefore should advance with a twin objective. A, to boost the industrial and the production manufacturing climate, and B, protection of the workers' interest, reinstatement in their jobs and other allied interests. The legislations brought in by some of the states and which are in the pipeline will require considerable balancing of interest. The goal should be to see that any one sector do not march ahead without the other sector, so that the interests of the other sectors are not in conflict. And the emphasis should be development of the industry and the businesses not in conflict with workers' interest, particularly workers' health and safety, apart from their financial and economic security. Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh are the first states to bring in the change in the labor laws. Uttar Pradesh introduced an ordinance seeking to exempt all factories and establishments engaged in the manufacturing process from operation of all labor laws for a period of 3 years, with a very few minor exceptions. Madhya Pradesh has also followed suit, but the changes proposed are far more balanced and statute specific. Madhya Pradesh has exempted the provisions of the Industrial Disputes Act, barring Chapter 5A and Chapter 5 dealing with retrenchment and layoff. How far these changes will fulfill the need of the country, that only the time will tell. Any change in labor laws will have to pass the test of constitutional propriety, as the rights of the labor force guaranteed by the labor laws emanate from those guaranteed by the Constitution as well as India's legal obligations. Like the mandate to pay stems from the minimum wages to be paid to them arising from Article 23 of the Constitution. The obligation to provide a healthy work environment and a safe and secure condition at the workplace forms part of the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. Any change in these aspects by way of dilution to meet the exigency of the employer will have to be guarded against vices of unconstitutionality. The task for lawmakers is thus not an easy one. With this overview of the matter, may I now invite our guest speaker, Honorable Justice Devanshu Bashak, a judge of the Honorable Calcutta High Court for more than last 6 years. Prior to his elevation, he had a rich practice of more than 21 years in almost all branches of law, particularly in commercial law, corporate law, arbitration law, as well as constitutional law. Justice Basak is known to deliver justice at lightning speed, but with a human touch. One before whom the proverb "justice delayed is justice denied" is defeated hands down. May I invite Justice Basak to give his views.
Good afternoon, panelists. Mr. Shakusen, I'm not too sure whether I am entitled to those kind words, but thank you nonetheless. You have covered most of the areas that I propose to speak. It makes life much more easier for me. You had harped on the legislative portion, and essentially, if I've understood you correctly, you have emphasized the need of harmony between industry and labor. One cannot but agree more with your point of view. Industry and labor need each other. That is something which is not negotiable. The two eminent panelists from the industry portion will perhaps not disagree with us when we say that labor is an essential component in the scheme of things where the economy progresses. Now, to bring about equilibrium in this post-COVID period, or even when the pandemic is in operation, is something which legislature, the courts, industry, labor, everybody are grappling with. Having said that, let us pause for a moment and look at the background of the situation. We were confronted with an unknown disease sometime in December. In fact, if the media reports are correct, then the first report of this disease was reported to the World Health Organization sometime on 31st of December 2019 by the Chinese government. Then WHO declared this as a public health emergency of international concern on 30th January 2020. It was named as the COVID-19 virus by the WHO on 11th of February 2020. Progressing further, WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic on 11th of March 2020. In India, we did not have anything as a lockdown, or did we anticipate this situation till a 14-hour Janata curfew was declared on 22nd of March 2020. The first lockdown was declared on 24th of March 2020. From then onwards, this relationship of labor and industry went into a spiral, perhaps which both are now grappling to control. This declaration of lockdown had an immediate effect, as Mr. Sen pointed out, of the problem of migrant laborers. There was another aspect to it also. As pointed out by Mr. Sen, the governments tried to halt this migration of labor from the place where the industries were located to the places where the labor force wanted to return or found to solace in coming back. A slew of measures followed. Provisions of the Disaster Management Act 2005 were invoked. Certain directions were issued under the provisions of the 2005 Act so far as payment of wages were concerned. It was then these orders issued under the Act of 2005 were challenged before the Supreme Court in a number of writ petitions, largely at the behest of the industry. The labor force employees joined these writ petitions. As you have pointed out, Mr. Sen, that the Supreme Court ultimately took a conciliatory view, but the writ petitions are still pending. Their lordships have noted that although the initial notifications for payment of salary and wages were withdrawn on 17th of May 2020 with effect from 18th of May 2020, nonetheless, there was a period of about 54 days from the date of the first notification for payment till the withdrawal thereof. So therefore, the point in law as to whether the employers were liable to pay for that period remained open. The lordships of the Supreme Court in the last of the orders expressed a desire that the industry and the labor should sit together and find out a settlement of the disputes. That the matter is yet to be taken up, but that point is still open as to whether the industry is liable to pay as directed by the previous notification till their withdrawal on the 17th of May with effect from 18th of May for the period of 54 days. There is also the challenge in those writ petitions in one of them to the vides of Section 10 of the Disaster Management Act 2005. But that is one portion of the paradigm that we are having the conference on. Then, so far as this impact of pandemic on the labor and the industry is concerned, one finds that there is an alarming effect on the rate of unemployment. if one goes again by the media reports and the studies that are available on the net, it suggests that in India, around 1/3 of the India's household will be facing a relentless livelihood crisis for the near future. A survey conducted by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy suggests that the overall rate of unemployment increased from 8.4% to 23.8% in the week ending 29th March 2020. I'm not too sure whether there is an improvement or a significant improvement subsequent thereto. Although presently the media reports and the internet material available on the internet suggest that the industry is trying to bring back the labor to the place where the industries are located. Individual industry, or let's say building industry concerned with building, they are trying to get labor from their native places back to the place where the construction is to take effect. But be that as it may, there is, as noted, that increase in unemployment level, and it's likely to continue for a period of time. In absolute terms, the number of unemployed people has increased from 3.20 crores to 3.80 crores. But again, these are rough figures. Possibly it would be much higher side. The studies also suggest that labor force participation rate has come down drastically in the weeks following the lockdown. A decline in labor force participation rate indicates that people have stopped looking for jobs and opted out of the labor market. This is more pronounced if one goes to the rural areas, where people are no longer interested to go back to their places of employment, because they have what, to my understanding, is a kind of crisis or a confidence crisis. They find that their employers are not backing them up adequately, so for them to remain or to tide over the absolute lockdown if and when imposed. So therefore they find it convenient to come to their native place, and then they find it convenient not to return. This is one area which the industry should consider, and I suppose they are considering it adequately, so that adequate safeguards are put in place where a industrial worker or a laborer is given the assurance that should such an eventuality happen in the future, the industry or the employer will take care of a situation of such situation, and the labor need not migrate. So therefore, it is imperative that industry has a labor force next to where the industrial activity is taking place. It inures to the benefit of both the industry as also the labor. So therefore, these are aspects I'm sure the other two eminent panelists from the industry will throw more light on. So far as legislations and courts are concerned, my view, the industry is far more organized than a labor force. So therefore, they should take up the lead, or they should approach the appropriate government at government level, or if need be, they can or other reliefs which they need to tide over their problems. Then Mr. Sen has highlighted various legislations, the state governments taking certain measures. Perhaps the entirety is yet to come about. There are economic measures declared by the central government as well, so by the state governments. The two states have gone in for legislation of labor laws. Whether they are adequate, whether they will withstand the judicial scrutiny, these are questions which are still left unanswered. Perhaps time will give us a better answer on such situation. But nonetheless, one should strive for an equilibrium which is beneficial to both the industry and the labor. That is one aspect which both the two forces should come forward to act in unison and try and achieve a resolution of the problem as as acceptable to both of them and as quickly as possible. Having said that, I think I will leave the floor for the eminent panelists to take over. Thank you for inviting me, Indian Chamber of Commerce, to this e-conference. It is such a humbling experience for me. Thank you so much. Mr. Sen, perhaps again you are mute.
Mr. Sen, Mr. Shakko Sen.
Is it audible now?
Yes, it's audible.
Oh, yes. Justice Bosak has reiterated the harmony between the labor and industry, labor being an essential component of industry, and in the context of there being an alarming rise in the labor rate of unemployment, he has stressed the need that the industry being an organized sector than the labor force, therefore industry will have to take the initiative and to guide the reforms in such a way that they don't run counter or conflict with the labor's interest also. The sum and substance is that both sides have to grow, have to change in tandem with one another. With this aspect, I now go on to the second speaker of the day, and I welcome Mr. Jishnu Saha, a senior advocate of the Calcutta High Court and a prominent counsel in having in-depth experience in various branches of law, particularly commercial law, constitutional law, contractual law, arbitration law. Mr. Saha is the most erudite counsel of the Calcutta High Court with the most cool approach, as one can say, and to see him demolish the points of the other side one by one with his cool, casual approach is a marvel to watch. And I have not been deprived of this benefit. Mr. Saha is a very active member of the governing body of the National University for Juridical Sciences, Kolkata, and the institute has greatly benefited with his participation and guidance. May I now welcome Mr. Jishnu Saha to give his views on the subject.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Sen. Thank you, Justice Bosak, for your views on the subject. I'm already embarrassed before I could begin. Mr. Sen has flattered me, I suppose, not deservingly. But nonetheless, the topic today is very interesting. It is very challenging. It is a challenge to our times. It is a challenge to the industry. It is a challenge to the workforce. And we are all today aggregated here with the object of seeing as to what kind of solutions can be found to this problem, if at all a solution is in sight. Now, Justice Bosak has very clearly pointed out the need to maintain equilibrium so far as the balance between the industry, interests of the industry and interests of the workforce is concerned. That undoubtedly is what needs to be but the challenge seems more grave than that. We have always proceeded on the basis of reciprocity between the industry and the workforce. Just like the workforce cannot survive without the industry cannot also survive without the workforce. The question is that today, is the industry really abrogating its duty to the workforce who have been now recognized to be stakeholders and not simply workers manufacturing a product for the industrialists that they ultimately render their services to? You see, if you look at the legislations that have now come to the forefront, more particularly the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, in the matter of insolvency and resolution of insolvency processes, in the matter of liquidation, today the workman is at par with the secured creditors. In fact, before the Insolvency and Resolution Code came into being, the workman had a primacy of position even over the secured creditors. So therefore, a workman is much more than a simple productive hand in the industry to which he is rendering his service. The question was, at the inception, is the workman exploited in terms of payment, in terms of working hours, in terms of health and safety standards? And that is what led to a slew of legislations for the benefit of the workmen and also a lot of judicial interpretation to interpret as to how these legislations must be applied, must be interpreted, must be read to assist in the growth process, because without the benefit of the workmen, we cannot expect industry to. We have come across situations where there have been contractual interpretations with regard to labor contracts. There have been interpretations to the legislations, which are the labor legislations, both from the center and from the states. There are in fact more than 40 central legislations, which I was surprised to find out, which deals with labor and workforce. There are also different state legislations. Now today, therefore, we have two situations. One is where the legislature has legislated to ultimately make it mandatory for certain benefits to be extended to the workmen, both in terms of service standards and also in terms of service contracts. And we have also service contracts which the industry has engaged into with the workmen to ensure that the workman gets a fair remuneration for the product, for the services that he's rendering. There were times when, in the past, the courts have had to interpret even regulations of government companies, which provided, for example, that services of workmen could be terminated upon giving 3 months' notice. Now, in 1985, the Supreme Court struck this down, saying that no, you cannot adopt a hire and fire rule for workmen. In 1986, the Supreme Court said in the Brojanath Ganguly Central Indian Water Transportation case that today, if you incorporate in a contract a term which is unconscionable, you cannot enforce that term because that will be violative of Article 14. That will be violative of public policy, particularly keeping in mind the fact that the employee does not have bargaining power as an individual. Now, with these aspects in mind, today legislations were already in existence, were further strengthened, amended, modified, to ensure that there were no such contracts which ultimately took advantage of the workmen and exploited them. Now, all these legislations ultimately were brought in to afford a degree of protection to the tenure of a workman, a degree of protection to the quantum of wages that he is entitled to receive, the standards of the workplace in which he is engaged, and so on and so forth. Now, so far as these challenges are concerned, today, we therefore found that there was some reciprocity in the system, since the industry, which would benefit from the services rendered by the workmen, would ultimately be expected to return to the workmen wages, working standards, sanitation, health, and other benefits as a reciprocal measure. But the question is, what happens when the industry is forced to close down? Now, kindly consider this as a situation. There are voluntary measures and there are involuntary measures. Today, if I enter into a contract with some person and I say that I now want to terminate the contract, then of course there are labor legislations in place which will prevent me from doing so. But ultimately, at the end of the day, today I will pay the labor as an industry only out of the revenue that the labor generates for me. Of course, I must provide the necessary infrastructure and the facilities for the purpose. But today, if there is a central government mandate which follows the pandemic, which of course is not within our control, and it is the mandate of the government which says that you will not run your industry, therefore you will not produce, therefore you will not sell, therefore you will not generate revenue. In that case, the question is, how does the industry make payment to the workmen? How does the industry today subscribe to all the mandates of all the legislations that have been put in place? Now, kindly bear in mind that even while imposing the national lockdown, the central government did not suspend the operation of any of the labor legislations. That came later. The UP government and the MP government, as Mr. Sen has pointed out, particularly took certain steps purportedly for the benefit of industry. But of course, the constitutionality of these acts is to be discussed. It is not for me to comment on the same, but today it certainly does raise very serious constitutional and human rights questions. Now, so far as this is concerned, therefore, we arrive at the point where there is need to find a balance between a position which is really a force majeure condition for which the Disaster Management Act had to be ultimately invoked, its provisions had to be enforced, which says that no, you will not produce. Now, if today I cannot generate production and I cannot generate revenue, then the question is, how do I pay? And that is why when the central government ultimately came up with the circular or notification saying that no, irrespective of the lockdown, irrespective of whether your business is closed or not, you have to make payment to the workmen. You cannot ultimately lay them off or you cannot retrench their services. That is when the courts were approached. And I am not surprised that the Honorable Supreme Court did not at the first instance decide this matter, because it is not something that is capable of immediate adjudication. Because today, it is not a situation which is within the industry's control or even the workmen's control. As Justice Boshak pointed out today, the workman is today not interested in attending the workplace because he does not find the atmosphere secure. So now we have the question of, again, migrant laborers. Now, let us understand one thing, that there is an organized workforce of workmen, which is called the formal labor, and there's an informal labor, which consists of contract labor and migrant labor and so on and so forth. Now, the question that has now come up before this, in this session, in this seminar is, what are the challenges before labor-intensive industries for sustainable industrial growth? And this, of course, brings us to the question that when today a labor-intensive industry is dependent to a very large extent on a migrant population of laborers, in that case, how is that shortage of labor going to be mitigated when normalcy returns? Now, to understand this, we have to understand that who are the categories of people who migrate for work? Who are the migrant laborers? To the extent that I have been able to understand with my limited experience in this area, is that there are people who migrate on a permanent basis, having no plans to return because they ultimately set up home, hearth, and they adopt the place of their work as the place of their residence also. Then there are seasonal migrants who temporarily return from the urban areas to their villages during times of harvest and then go back to the urban centers. And finally, there is a third category of the footloose migrant labor, which are hired by contractors from the rural areas and who move from city to city in search of work without really any final destination. Now, this is something that the industry has ultimately embraced because this provided an army of cheap labor, which at times, unfortunately, would allow them to employ labor even below the statutory minimum, with a particular portion of these wages that are to be paid being appropriated by the contractors. And this was also in a manner beneficial that, this did not entail further obligations on the part of the employers, given the fact that these migrant workers were never really a part of the formal working population. Now, I was surprised to find that the formal sector, on an average, employs only 7% of the aggregate labor force, and the rest of the 93% remain in the informal sector. Now, with the formal organized industry employing a lot of casual or informal labor, it at times proved opportune for certain enterprises, including labor-intensive enterprises such as construction, etc., to engage in cost-cutting exercises. And that is why there was need to implement. Now, we talk about the existing legislations and the need for reform. There is no doubt a need for holistic law reforms in both industrial and contract laws. A, because unorganized labor has little or no bargaining power. B, is that although the framing of most labor legislations is aimed at addressing this problem, unfortunately, implementation of labor legislations has not been really up to the mark, particularly since a very large number of laborers who are the informal sector do not fall within the purview of these legislations. For example, the Contract Labor Regulation Act says as to how a contract labor will be treated, but he is not entitled to the benefits of the other welfare legislations, which are the labor legislations. The question is that what do we have to achieve this balance? The industry will have to get back. Because even if the virus does not go away, today we have seen lifting of the lockdown. We have seen that the government urging industry to get back to work. We have seen that there are directives given that get back to work but maintain social distancing, maintain the health standards that are essential to keep the virus at bay. So therefore, industry has to bounce back. Now, if the industry has to bounce back, then the question is that what does the industry do, A, with regard to the benefits which have accrued to the workmen who were in their roles and who have not been retrenched or could not be retrenched, because ultimately the industry needs these workmen back when they start resuming operations. And B is, how do you entice this migrant workforce back to where they have been working? The obligation, of course, is to provide a decent, safe and secure condition of work. And this, as Mr. Sen had pointed out, is something that had been acknowledged in Article 21 of the Constitution. These are the Supreme Court judgments which have followed to interpret this to be a part of right to life. Then again, as Mr. Sen had pointed out, Article 23 of the Constitution, which provides for right against exploitation, prohibition of forced labor, said that no, non-payment of minimum wages is violation of this fundamental right. It amounts to forced labor. This apart, there are human right concerns also, because the right to unionization or the right to social security, they also constitute international human rights under the, if I remember correctly, it's called the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ICSR. Now, the statutes, the legislations which have been noticed in the write-up to the seminar are, amongst other things, Termination of Employment Act, Minimum Wages Act, Equal Remuneration Act, Payment of Wages Act, Bonus Act, Weekly Holidays Act, Factory Act, Contract Labor Act, etc., etc. The governments of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh have, to an extent, ultimately tried to suffuse these legislations because it is seen that as something that needs to be done to give fillip to the industries. But abrogation of almost the entirety of existing labor laws, as has been attempted to be done by the UP government, would arguably mean an application of the an abandonment of the constitutional and human rights mandate. Because even though poorly implemented, the protections that are enshrined in the labor law statutes, they serve as powerful aspiration and bargaining tools for the workers, the trade unionists, the activists, etc. And dismantling of all labor laws across would leave millions of workers acutely vulnerable, which would ultimately bring about a dissymmetry between the question that are we today faced with a paradox? Yes, the COVID-19 situation has brought this paradox to light. So therefore, the much needed labor reforms and legislations which are required, this is perhaps the right time to push for those and to ensure that these are ultimately implemented. As I said, that the paradox is one of over-regulation, because there are more than 40 central labor statutes with many state level statutes. And the paradox is highlighted by the fact that almost 90% of the labor force falls outside the coverage of formal labor laws. Therefore, the rationalization of existing laws is imperative for the sake of both labor flexibility for the employers, and universal legal protection for the workers. Now, the question therefore is that what is the need of the day? We have to understand one thing, that ultimately industry has to revive. For its revival, industry needs to attract A, capital, and B, labor. It is perhaps a given that today good capital chases high labor standards. And high labor standards can only be ensured if today the workmen are attracted back with the proper amenities and facilities that will ensure their peace of mind in the workplace and will ensure protection of their wage, protection of their employment, which is protection of their livelihood. Now, the question is that is the industry, when it is not saying that we will not pay the workmen, or when it is saying that we will not pay the workmen its full wages, or when it is saying that we will retrench the workmen, really doing something that it has to do or is trying to take advantage of a situation. This is where we must ultimately address our focus, because it is not really a Machiavellian situation where Machiavelli said that never let a crisis go to waste. So therefore, that is not the approach. Now, so far as the government of Uttar Pradesh is concerned or Madhya Pradesh is concerned, they, for example, said that the workers should now work 12 hours a day. The question is that, is this all practicable? Is this all ultimately the rational nexus that we are seeking to achieve? It does seem from the kind of laws that the states of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh are now seeking to make, that it is really trying to suspend labor protection and make it easier for the employers to sack the workers. Now, this is not the mentality with which industry and labor can survive together. There has to be a sense of consciousness in the whole being. There has to be some assurance given by the labor to the industry and vice versa, so that they can both ultimately complement each other in industrialization of the country, in getting India back to where its industrial state was before the COVID-19 lockdown, and maybe even further. The object, therefore, must be, this is my personal feeling, is that you have to reduce displacement, you have to reduce distress of the workers, you have to keep the workmen's morale up. The existing labor laws will have to be therefore consolidated, and to the extent that I've been able to understand, they have to be consolidated in really 4 codes. First is a code on wages. Then we have to have a code on industrial relations. Then we have to have a code on occupational safety and health. And finally, a code on social security. It is this which will ultimately serve the long-term interest of both the labor and the industry. And this is something that I feel will ultimately enhance long-term productivity and profitability. If cooperation can replace mutual suspicion, and if labor representatives can be trusted to participate in the corporate governance, which today is a given because today it is recognized that labor is a stakeholder in the industry, in that case, perhaps it will be possible to achieve mutual and beneficial goals. And that is where Justice Boshak and Mr. Sen have both said that we need to reform. We need to ensure that there is protection. Now today, so far as protection is concerned, we have to also consider there are different categories of industries: the big industries, the medium and medium industries, which have all very often gone by the name of MSMEs, and the small industries. While the big industries may be able to sustain themselves for a while, even during a lockdown situation, it may not always be possible for medium and small industry to do so. So there we come in with the social security measures, which the government has of course announced to a great extent, which is a part and parcel of disaster management. And the government has come up with packages for providing food and some displacement benefits to the workmen. But that has not solved the problem of migrant workmen. The people who have migrated back, the question is that will they now, the reverse migration has happened already. The question is, will they now come back to the place of their work? If they do, the question is, what are the terms on which they would be willing to return? If they do not, the question is, what are the terms on which the existing labor population of a particular locale would be able to support the industry or would be willing to do so? The question, therefore, is how rapidly do we reinstate the informal workforce in a post-COVID-19 scenario to ensure the sustainable economic well-being of the industry? And to my mind, that this can only be achieved when the labor force is given a particular kind of resilience, both by way of statute, the implementation of the statute, and by way of assurances from the industry. I feel personally that to tackle this situation, a multi-pronged solution has to be thought of, one of which will have to be short-term, and one of which will have to have long-term manifestations. For example, the short-term interventions will require immediate relief measures, which have been provided by the state to an extent, such as direct cash transfers and food supplies to effectively alleviate their present situation of the workforce, to say that yes, both the industry and the government are standing by the workmen and that they ultimately would like the workmen to come back to generate revenue for the industry. And Here, of course, there will be challenges, more particularly in respect of labor-intensive operations, particularly when one has to now keep in mind that social distancing has to be maintained. That will call for institutionalization of public health and other safety protocols before industrial operations resume. In order to achieve this, we will have to have the state's participation. It will have to be in consultation with the health experts of the state that today a protocol has to be ultimately framed, because today, unless a standard is introduced, we will never be able to ensure that a particular protocol in social distancing, a particular protocol in the factory floor space, so far as industrial workmen is concerned, is adhered to across the board. So this is where we have to have that protocol. Then we'll have to have implementation of the protocol today, because today, notwithstanding the fact that a protocol may be in place, if today these protocols are not ultimately maintained, adhered to, or implemented, in that case, they will become meaningless. And today, again, the fear psychosis, which this COVID virus has brought in its wake, will take over and will ultimately drive the workforce back, or will make them wary and unwilling to work. This will certainly not be healthy for the industry at all. And while business operations resume, I think in the long-term measures, particularly keeping in view the fact that we are looking at a whole body of migrant population of workmen, I think what needs to be done perhaps sometime in the future for long-term gain and benefit is that a database of workers will have to be created, comprising of information about migrant workers, including the last wages drawn by them, their work experience, their previous place of work, their skill sets and levels of training, educational qualifications, places of origin. And once this database is created, and it is fed into something like an employment exchange model, that will ensure that there is a database from which, or a pool from which, industry can draw its workforce. And that will also ensure that this pool ultimately supplies workers who, A, subscribe to the industry standards, and B, to whom the industry ultimately undertakes an obligation to afford certain facilities and to make certain minimum payments of wages, etc., etc. In other words, this is something that the state has to take under its wing to enroll workers and to ensure that they are ultimately absorbed by the industry on a need basis. The state can ensure that wages are fixed. The state can ensure that minimum necessary protective equipment are provided, that safety protocols are put in place, that there is a suitable working place for each enrolled worker. This exchange can ultimately be integrated with what we call the digital vision of India. And the state can ultimately gradually transfer this model to the market, which can ultimately aggregate it to their business models. In the long term, I feel that a much needed behavioral transformation should be brought about, where the state ultimately adopts a hands-off approach, while the industry itself treats its workmen as a human asset rather than as a cost of production. In order to facilitate this transformation and to build workers' resilience, there has to be focus, in my respectful understanding of things, on ensuring adequate social security, skill development, and an exchange model. The emphasis has to be on elimination of fear. Now, these are the views that I have on the topic which has been given to me, which of course undoubtedly is of great import today. I do not have an answer to how immediately the question of disparity between the generation of revenue and the payment of the workmen's dues, both under contract and legislation, can be sorted out. And that is why the Supreme Court has gone forward to say that at this moment, you cannot really go ahead and enforce contracts. At this moment, you cannot really go ahead and enforce legislative principles, practices, or mandates. You have to find out as to how you can coexist, because there will be a better day, there will be a better climate when you have to go back to what is rightfully yours, both in terms of asking the workman to give in terms of service and paying the workman his dues and to give him a proper protective work environment. These are the questions to which solutions must be found through dialogue. And this is not something that can immediately be found by enforcing legislations, or by enforcing contracts. I think that these are thoughts on which the industry can reflect. There are other speakers after me, and I would be very happy to hear as to what they have thought about the matter and how the industry looks at the problem and seeks to resolve the situation. These are my present views. Thank you very much, Mr. Sen. Thank you, Justice Boshak. It was very illuminating to hear your views before I could come on. I have drawn from them. I have just tried to expound on them a little further. I will be very happy to know what the industry has to say in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Saha. According to Mr. Saha, the challenge is much more grave than mere maintaining an equilibrium between labor and industry. And he has led a very important dimension, that the approach of the industry to treating a workman. Workman is not merely a productive hand. He is an asset. Their approach towards them has to change so as to get them back from the place where they have migrated, to make them feel that the place where they were in the factories and the establishments, that is also their place. It is not merely the place of the employer or the industry, and as they are a productive hand in the industry, therefore they are as much a part of the industry as the employer themselves. Apart from this, he has also discussed on the ills of bringing about legislation just at this moment, only with the idea of allowing the industry to grow because of the sufferance they have suffered because of this lockdown. The problem is, he has said that the attitude must be the industry and labor has to complement each other. They are not to compete with one another. That is the idea that has to be enshrined in the reforms and the legislations which are already introduced or which are in the pipeline. And the final idea which has come from Mr. Saha, which the industry as well as the states will have to consider, is that the creation of the pool on the basis of which the industry will get their general flow of laborers. And once this pool is created, the state role assumes great significance, in that state has to provide the proper environment and the proper machinery for protection of the workers' rights to work in a concerned industry or an unit. So there again, the third role has to be played by the state to bring in the coexistence of the labor and the industry. Thank you, Mr. Saha, once again. I now invite our next speaker from the industry to give us his valuable views on the subject. May I request Dr. Krishna Nirmallo Sen, an expert in the field of mechanical and industrial engineering, as also in the arena of occupational safety and health and development, having an advanced international diploma from National Institute for Working Life, Sweden. Dr. Sen was awarded the Safety Award from Institution of Engineers India, the Edgar Monsanto Queenie Safety Professional of the Year for the year 2013-14 from the American Society for Safety Engineers, and also the Professional Engineer Award from Engineering Council of India. Dr. Sen, may you now give us your views on the subject.
Yeah, namaskar. Greetings to all the respected panel members, including Honorable Justice Devang Subhasak and my speaker very nicely mentioned, Mr. Jishnu Shaha, and of course, Mr. Shakkeshen, and the next panelist, Mr. Prabal Mahapatra, and of course, all the participants of this event. Now, I have a small presentation. I will try to share the content if it is possible. But I'm not able to get that link activated. Can somebody help? I was trying to do that. I have a small presentation to run through.
Can use the share button, Dr. Sen.
But the share content button is not getting activated. Is there any chance?
Somehow my share button is also not working.
So I think the host privilege, if I have, then I can do that. I think so.
So mine is activated. I don't know.
Now I think I can do it. Yeah. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be speaking primarily on the health and safety challenges post-COVID, and what are the things we can perhaps do in the industry, and how strategy could be, considering that the virus is there, and as per the current understanding that it might still remain to bother us for several months from now. So I will highlight a couple of approach which we are actually looking at. One is which we had through a lockdown. If you see the triangle which I have put at the left side, is we call it very popularly as hierarchy of hazards control. So we prefer to have the best option at the top, that is elimination and substitution, followed by engineering control and administrative and personal protective equipment, which of course we are all asking everyone today to cover the face with the face mask or a sort of cloth, double or triple clothes. But the thing is that the primary thing is elimination, which government has tried to do the lockdown, putting the people away. But that's not possible. We have all come back. We have to ensure that the industry is running. And then the approach would be to have more and more engineering control and administrative control, which you can see on the left side, like testing and isolation, upgradation of equipment, cleaning and disinfection, and more administrative control, like increasing awareness, having the insurance and proper response, and last but not the least, the usage of personal protective equipment, depending on what type of activity we are doing. So for large workers, like I come from an industry which is primarily construction and major projects where I have thousands of people, there are huge challenges to recommence the work, because the primary importance to ensure that the people don't get infected, and there is a chance of infection. If one person get infected, then there is a chance of a large number of people getting infected during the process. The proper precautions are taken. So given that fact, this importance of these precautions are very serious for the management, who is going to commence or lead the commencement of the job, and accordingly all the precautions has to be in place. So coming to the summary, which we have been always focusing on the protecting of the people, that primarily includes worker, and the social distancing, which is of course a challenge in several activities, and some of the measures which I will show in the display ideally been done, but it requires a continuous focus from both the side, from the people who are using the facilities as well as the management side, because washing of hands frequently, and there are several ways of interactions which people come across during an industrial operations, where the activity require a couple of people to come together and do things. So naturally, the tools and tackles, the equipment itself will have such type of possibility, and given the fact that a large number of workers, large number of people could be asymptomatic yet infectious. So that is the big challenge in this pandemic, because not everybody is showing the symptoms. We have thermal scanning and things like that, but we know the limitations of such tool, and global experience also indicates that the people get infected sometimes from the people who do not show any sort of symptoms of the disease. So I also wanted to show another sort of model in the left side, which we call a very popularly called Swiss cheese model. And here, the importance of having several protective measures, which the industry is trying to bring, is basically which you have seen earlier slide through various model. And they're here, in case one measure fail, like if social distancing fail, then the PPE should. If the social distancing and PPE fails, then there has to be a chance of people get the proper testing or getting isolated immediately in case of any sort of mild symptoms. The app usage of the Arogya Setu app is very, very effective, which we have also told everybody, because nowadays most of the people have smartphones and they can install it. So this has a couple of prerequisites which has been institutionalized to ensure that the large number of workforce, when they resume, of course, it is the fact, as our previous speakers also indicated, that migrant workers, which constitute a major workforce in the business we are in, but a large number of force also stayed back because of some incentives, as well as the care which has been meet to them. I mean, in terms of their facilities as well as compensation during the period. So our primary responsibility should be to ensure that these people do not get affected, and that for that parallel actions, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that all the actions, if you are taken, there could be chance that one action may be little faulty because of individual choices made at that point of time, but the other protections which are parallelly together, so that might work and help. So keeping all the precautionary measures is of very, very high importance. Now I'll take you to quickly some of the actions which you have issued for the projects. Is that some people have pre-existing illness. For example, they have high blood pressure or blood sugar, as well as kidney, other ailments, and because the number of people works from very high experience to younger people as well. So depending on their time they spent in the projects and the years of service, there are people who are having some pre-existing illness. Those illness is not a problem for their day-to-day work, but when this has come, then it is very important that they inform, and they are either allowed to work in separate group or small group. So it is very important for the engineer or manager should know that who is having a problem, and that applies to the manager himself, because in case some of the cases he might, if he's a design man, he can always work from home and did not come to office. So those type of choices and options should be available. Of course, those options are limited to the people who do the manual work, but they can also as well be put in activities which will require less contact with large number of people. So it's very important. And if there are symptoms, then a guideline has been issued to stay home, and of course the app also helps us to adhere to the requirements. And there are guidelines such as if somebody is feeling unwell, and there has to be a distance of 2 meters at site, and as well as when they are entering the project or the gate or coming to the ride a bus, internal buses, and physical contacts with other workers and visitors, as well as customers, or for example, the clients who come to supervise jobs. Guidelines also require the usage of conveyance vehicles because people get transported from their accommodation to the work spot. And then other, for example, some of the vehicles are air conditioned, so they require the windows to be open because more than 1 or 2 persons are traveling there. And lifts, wherever project sites do not have much lifts, but they have hoist where people are transported on a chimney or a high-rise structure like a boiler or blast furnace. So, there could be a capacity of 8 or 10%, but we have ensured that the number of people committed to ensure the social distancing is, and sanitization of vehicle, for example, is another important thing which is to be ensured. There are a couple of activities where people have to come together as the might require. So additional to the mask, there should be a face shield so that in case of any droplets, the transmission do not happen. So this type of precautions are communicated to the team as well as during the morning and after lunch meetings before starting of the work to ensure that the people are aware about the activities are designed to the extent possible, not all the time, but that this consideration kept in mind. The personal protective equipment includes some of the personal equipment which is already mandatory, like helmets and shoes, but it comes the usage of COVID-19 related PPEs, and that is an additional one on the current PPE. So there are some challenges with the PPE, and in other times somebody may just pick up any helmet, but in this case, exchanging personal protective equipment is completely no-no. And disposal is also very, very important. So those precautions and according to the issue of those material is also very important, because it is responsibility of the management to provide this personal equipment to the worker without any cost. And there are other challenges like washing of hands and eating places. Generally, eating places, so everybody likes to eat together. Sometimes they exchange foods, but in the current conditions, it is impossible to have such type of social exchanges, though it is very, very important for the mental health and things like that. But the arrangements have to be made in such a manner that the people are required or asked to sit away and eat their food and not mingle and stay together lesser than the distance which is recommended. And because eating place is another, really a very vulnerable area where the transmission of virus is very, very high. Similar thing applies to the washrooms as well as home when people goes back in workplace, like remote workplaces where I'm talking about project sites or things like that. They generally leave their shoes outside, but when an engineer goes back to home or a manager goes back to home, it is important that he sanitize himself, his hands, and then only enter. So these are the basic precautions which is important for the industry to consider. It is also important to consider things like this, as during the lockdown, industry has been locked down suddenly. So there are equipment, pressurized cylinders, electrical cables, and like we know the recent case with LG Polymer in Vizag and few other cases. So there is a chance of unexpected mechanical or electrical events, including explosions, unless the work commencement is done with a proper planned and safe manner. The workers are trained, retrained, because of sudden being away for 2 months or a little more in some places. The people who are in the continuity of the activity, they require maybe a short yet required re-strengthening of their skill and re-verification of their skill, as well as the location of the work, the area of work should also be properly checked, audited, and integrity of the mechanical and electrical equipment is ascertained. Otherwise, there is a chance that the workers and the people will go there and they may have a chance of getting affected by the by the equipment itself.
Dr. Sen, I'm very sorry to interrupt. Can you be slightly faster, because we are running short of time?
I could understand that, so I will do the faster. Yeah. Okay, so there are precautions related to pre-deployment as well. As I mentioned about the skill verification and refreshing of the skill is very, very important. Then training programs regarding the COVID-19 social distancing, because this is not a very common subject for the workers to know, and it is important when we start back, we give them the basic knowledge, including the social distancing as well. Also, it is important staff members and engineers also follow the requirement themselves. Otherwise, they create a sort of bad example for that. And similarly, transportation of people and attend during that before the attendance is taken, the basic checks as well as the contactless less attendance. Some of the activities, as I mentioned, require close coordination, and I have just sharing some of the examples how these things can be done in brick and mortar terms, but it requires a lot of participation from the worker as well as the management. And of course, meeting as we are doing today, there are several meetings, but now the online meeting is the option, and that should be used properly. Disinfection of washrooms, common areas, canteens, and also providing additional things like sanitizers and things like that. Some changes in the conventional method to in-house development of things. Then isolation, preparing for any eventuality is very, very important at projects to ensure that in case somebody is feeling unwell, before he is shifted to a proper facility, he has he can go to a segregated place and stay there. Then, of course, we have experienced chances of people getting affected by the incoming vehicles, materials, and drivers and helpers who come from different locations across the country. That is allowed, and we do not know from where they are coming. I will not go to the detail of the slide, but the point here is that the infection can travel from outside, and it is very important to take precautions accordingly. And then worker habitats and of course canteens, etc. So I have mentioned about it, importance of providing the proper facilities in cooking as well as dining, quarantine and isolation rooms, segregating the people, providing hand washing facility, because in the formal sector, so we have to have local arrangements to ensure that the hygiene and health precautions are being taken. And as I mentioned, that the people with condition is at high risk, and people who have morbid conditions is required to inform and to be taken care by the leadership and the management that they are not exposed to high amount of risk. Then managing mental health is a problem. So people get stressed up, people are not able to meet the families, and some plan to travel to their home back and they have not got the opportunity to travel. So that has been a problem for not only from India, but also we have projects, international projects. And so this is a challenge, and it's important for the immediate superior and also the team to ensure that is taken care, and the doctors are also connected through which numbers are shared, so that people can call them and share their problems in case they have any. It's also important to have a very well planned response in case of somebody is found with COVID-19 symptoms, because we do not know whether it is really COVID or not, or whether he'll be diagnosed as COVID when he goes for a testing. But it is important for the industry to prepare for such facilities, whether it is in office or in the factory or in the construction site. There should be a plan clear, that because in case of an emergency, unless there is a emergency response plan and the team identified, because who is going to help him and to shift him can also have a high chance of infection. So they should have proper personal protective equipment, not as a normal person, but like a physician. So he has to have a complete coverall to ensure that the people, or 2 or 3 persons or 4 persons, depending on the size of the project or the plan, they have to have the personal protective equipment with them, and on demand or on request, they should be available, and they should know how he has to be transported and transmitted, or taken to the medical facility and admitted when required. That is in summary, because I had a little rushed up. I understand the time is less. So in case there is any query, I will be at the end glad to respond to that. And over to Mr. Sakko Sen for further steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. Dr. Sen has given a very lucid presentation to show the health and safety challenges post COVID-19 and to how to deal with the same, which is of course the primary responsibility of the industry, which has to commence production and manufacturing activity after this lockdown. Thank you, Dr. Sen. May I now invite Mr. Probal Mohapatra. He is the head legal of Tata Consumer Products Limited, a person of immense experience of more than 20 years in the industry, particularly in the legal field, having in-depth knowledge of contractual laws, consumer laws, and other allied laws. He is a combination of science and law, having done physics honors and has a law degree. Plus, he is a qualified patent attorney. May I invite Mr. Probal Mohapatra now to give his views on the subject.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Sen. It's a nice introduction. It's more than what I deserve. And good afternoon, everybody. It is indeed a pleasure for me to share this platform and talk anything in front of Honorable Justice Bosak and Mr. Jishnu Saha. So it's really right. As an industry lawyer, I mean, industry legal expert, in-house legal expert, it is really enriching to hear from Mr. Sakkoshen, from you, from Jishnu Saha, and undoubtedly Mr. Honorable Justice Mr. Bosak. Almost all of the topic already been covered, touched, but I want to give something more, which as an industry lawyer, what I felt the difficult points and the pain points and how an industry should try to overcome this the scenario of COVID-19, right? Let me come to the point. I was going through the research of the financial institutions like Barclays or Moody. What they predicted, the GDP of the India will at least be down by 1.5% in next financial year for the COVID-19 scenario. And what it impacted? It impacted almost all the industries, primarily automotive, power, IT, travel and tourism, which are drastically impacted. The other portion like FMCG, where I belongs to, is little better off, but not in all counts. If you see today, every household is buying only the essential commodities. What they're buying, the groceries, the basic needs, not the clothes, not the cosmetics much. So it is not fully been grown up. At the same point of like healthcare, today we see everyone's going to hospital, looking they're doing fine, but they're not. Why not? Because the person who are doing the regular health checkups, like the planned surgeries, everything postponed. So they are not actually getting the revenue which they're supposed to get. I know a couple of hospitals invested huge amount of say capex for buying some machines from abroad, whatever. For next 4 months, there's no business for them. So somewhere we can see as industry perspective, almost every segment of the industry is highly impacted by this COVID-19 scenario. Now let's see how, as the industry, to overcome and what the measures we can take. Only one good part is the Supreme Court order, as has been highlighted Mr. Saha also, that the industry got relief, no coercive action to be taken by to the industry for not paying appropriate salaries or deferred salaries and whatever. That's one way to think that. But the major problem is the workforce, which is the really pain point, the migrant workers. And if we see them, every state has putting some regulations. If you want to call them back to your city, you have to follow some procedures. And in many cases, we are facing a behavior of the workforce, they don't want to come back. Like we have a factory in Haryana, we have a factory in Bombay and everywhere. The person gone back to Bihar or UP, they don't want to come back for two reasons. One is the state government is giving some benefit to them. Some programs they involve for next 4 months, 3 months. And the sense of fear. Would they be safe coming back to the city of Mumbai or not? No, they're not. They're not safe. Despite whatever assurance giving from the Tata like the industry house, still we are facing difficult to get the laborers. And the other part is coming, person who are coming for work, say 50%, 30% people, they are slogging. They are very good worker, but they cannot do the production which is supposed to do. Now, if the country wants me to produce, say, 10 million kilo of particular product, the workforce I'm getting today, I cannot run, even they do the best. And the second part, the COVID-19 protocols, social distancing. A machine needs 4 people to run a particular, say, conveyor belt. I cannot have 4 people at the same point of time because of the social distancing, the norms has to follow. So what I have to do? I have to run 2 machines instead of 4 machines. And I need to do it overtime, and which is most likely go beyond the limit of overtime in India today. So I'll come to the later on how some of the states like UP, like Rajasthan, like MP has given relaxation to overtimes, and how we can still run the machines more than 8 hours by the same workforce and trying to achieve the targets which the nation needs me to fulfill. At the same point of time, since the production is not as much as you're supposed to do, there is abundance of the permanent workers. So there's a need to retrenchment, need to lay off. So I'm not saying Tata House today not laid off single worker still today and will not, but there are indeed some requirements, some of the industries, there is no productions. So they cannot carry on with a huge amount of workforce. They plan to produce a lot for the country, but they're not doing as of now. So there is a need. Now coming to the points of UP, MP, and now Rajasthan, which they given few relaxation on the labor laws. They have almost repealed many labor laws except the major one like minimum wages, like some case the Building and Construction Workers Act in UP, but they have given flexibility of the working hours. Like in Madhya Pradesh giving a flexibility to hire and fire of 1,000 days contract labor. So those sort of things are good for the industry, but again, I borrow the point from Mr. Saha that it may not be good for the workers. They are not to safe hands because if everybody can try and hire and fire attitudes, they're not too safe. And that could be one of the reasons they're not going to come back to the workers. At the same time, the trade unions also now restricted. Like earlier, if there is a more than 100 the workers, we cannot retrench. This protocol will be followed. Nowadays, the limit has gone to 300 people. So a small factory actually can close without the retrenchment regulations, without followed the protocol of giving the state government's approval and blah, blah, blah. It's easy for them. Similarly, in MP, if we want to say start a new factory, new premises, the rules for the inspection by the government authority has been relaxed. I can engage a third party to inspect the factory premises and get it up and running from next day or next week to make it faster commencement of new factory operations, right? So what I told, the over and above all this thing, the Disaster Management Act, which is one of the issue as an industry are facing a problematic part to follow and comply, because if knowingly or unknowingly something happens to my workers, there are 2 aspects to Disaster Management Act. It can invoke a penalty to the board of directors. Like if a factory has a COVID patient during its running time, the board is answerable to the government how person got infected. So we have to establish with a conclusive proof that we have followed each and every protocols of the MHA, the food safety, the Ministry of Health, everything, and despite that, the person has got COVID. That's nothing to do with the factory. If we cannot, there's a provision under the DM Act, the MD or the ED can be penalized up to 1 month imprisonment in case no casualty happens. If some casualty happens, up to 6 months of imprisonment. So at the industry, we have to ensure what Mr. Nirmal Sen has told categorically. We have to ensure each and every protocol to be strictly followed. Otherwise, we can end up with a prosecutions of the top management, and we have to strictly follow that. So what do we do as a company? We have to make a compliance checklist, has a regular getting update from the factory heads that yes, we have done XYZ activity, the temperature has been recorded, the person has declarations that I don't have any comorbid patient, comorbidity with myself, or don't have any 90 years old person in my house, blah, blah, blah. So that's a task you have to follow and strictly monitor to ensure the company board is safe and protected. Now come 2 of the segment which are largely impacted, like it's a mostly labor intensive sectors. What is the building, the construction worker segment and the plantation segment. The plantation, already the earlier seminars, many people talked on that, but I'm not touched up on the same thing once again. But the construction business is quite a lot in the North Belt, particularly UP and some other states. So what, as I told, they have given some relaxation on the acts, but at the same point of time, if you see the 94% of the construction worker today are not enlisted to be, there's a term called, I think BCOW, they have a certificate. They're not registered building and construction workers. 94% not. And the government has given enough facilities, the help for the BCOW, the workers. But in reality, the 94% not registered. So they're not getting the benefit government extended to them. Similarly, they don't have Aadhaar cards, they don't have PAN cards, they don't have bank accounts. So even as an employer, we want to give the money, or they want to get a government fund to their account, they're not able to get it because they're migrant. They don't have all the papers with them. They have to establish the fact, yes, I'm a building construction worker. So that's the problem, even otherwise not getting the benefits which supposed to get. The other part, like healthcare industry, like today, more and more articles coming into essential, not essential commodity, but essential items like mask, like sanitizer, everything, and the price getting regulated. So the same company, say Unilever, say or somebody, Dettol, or the price they cannot hike, they cannot sell sanitizer in a cost of 500 rupees. The same sanitizer bottle, which is earlier 750 rupees, now being sold at 250 rupees because government has put a cap on the pricing, which is good for the public, very good for the public. But the company has to take the heat of the revenue loss. And the same point of time, everything percolated to the labors. I mean, how to pay the workforce. Can I cut the salary? No. Then how to manage the accounts? The other way to running an establishment like a big organization, be it a labor intensive or non-labor intensive, we have to follow the corporate governance structures. Whatever the pandemic is, we cannot go to office, we cannot file a forms, but we have to get approved exemption from the either MC or SEBI. Now recently, we got a multiple exemptions from the SEBI or the MCA, in particular to run say prior intimation to SEBI or having a board meeting. Now today, if you see, the SEBI has given an approval to have a board meeting through VC. It was earlier also there, but there are some restrictions. But few of the proposal I cannot take in a VC conducted board meetings. So now we can take all the approvals, all the resolution can be passed in a VC conducted board meetings. And more so, they have given approval to having in VC conducted shareholders meeting, like AGM. So even today the TCS, one of the pioneer Tata company, has done the AGM through VC already, and our company to be the next one. So that's a big relief given by SEBI. At the same point of time, they've given relaxation to file the appropriate forms, you got timelines, extended timelines. So all these things are getting, and that way government is supporting the industry to run this COVID pandemics. But what is difficult here to getting primarily the labors and primarily the make the demand and supply, the balance between two, which is not happening because of the problems. And when a containment zone coming suddenly, the factory has to stop or to run with a very, very slim structure. And that point of time is difficult to survive with the demand theory. But saying all this thing good picture, there's a real picture, something very, very gloomy till today. If you see, the Ola, the Zomato, the Uber has laid off multiple staffs, like more than 1,000 plus will laid off. And the startup companies, like there are multiple startup companies which are supposed to be grown up as a big MNC tomorrow. They don't have more than 3 months of cash in hand, running the operation cash in hand. So we can expect this company to run for longer at this situation. At the same point of time, you guys can't lay off, you guys can't, retrench, you have to pay full salaries. It is very good to hear, but on practicality, it is very difficult to implement because the amount of money that establishment cost is quite a huge. And that to the kiosk segment, like Tata Starbucks, like even Tata Cha, the malls are completely closed. And so the stores are not running. And despite best of our recourses, going to court, when we're not getting a rent exemptions. So malls are not open. I have to pay the rent to the malls for my store. It is a few lakhs per month. There's no business happening. There are 40 staffs working over there. It's a scenario for big MNC like Tata's, like L&T's, like the bidlers can run for longer. But for most of the industries, which are actually the the revenue generator for the GDP part of the India is not actually doing good business. And if we are hoping something will come up in near future, maybe in a few months, you get some vaccine or some medicine, something. Otherwise, it is not going to see the light of the good business very soon. And that's a clear picture. So that's where we are as an industry. And even the banking segment, if you see the credit card statement in last few months, the maximum spending happens only on grocery, anything else. And the spending has gone down drastically. People are not spending only. In fact, 89% of the populations has a spending card in last 3 months, which is going to show that if the people doesn't spend, how the company will run, and so how we can get the business. So that's the gloomy picture I want to highlight. And the only way is we get some relaxations from the government, more relaxation like the salaries, like the pay cuts, the industry perspective. And hopefully the medical segment will come up some good news in near future to get a vaccine of the medicine of the COVID. Otherwise, we may have to make multiple such the seminars to discuss again how to run the business. That's where I am. I'm happy to answer any queries.
Thank you, Mr. Mahapatra. Now, we have come more or less to the end of the discussion. There is more or less a consensus in what every one of us have spoken. And I think the mood is what India requires maybe is rationalization of the existing labor laws. The need for carefully tailored labor reforms must not be conflated with complete deregulation. A wholesale repudiation of the existing labor laws may, instead of boosting investment and providing a fillip to industry and business growth, may lead to class conflict, causing social unrest, which is most undesirable in present day context. Dismantling of the laws in force as a whole cannot be the solution we are looking for. As we have already discussed, the labor laws have their genesis in the rights guaranteed by the Constitution as also basic human rights of the workforce. Therefore, doing away with the basic structure of the existing labor laws would imply an abdication of this constitutional and human rights mandate. Instead of looking for a short-term solution, it is desirable that the law and the policymakers should keep long-term goals as the primary objective of the proposed reforms. To sum up in a single sentence what I have understood of the speaker's views, for sustainable industrial growth in India, there is a need for holistic labor laws reforms which will enable firms and business houses to expand, keeping the interest of the laborers intact, resulting in formalization of the economy. I think it is all from us. I hand it over to Mr. Roy.
Thank you so much. I do thank all the distinguished panelists, speakers. It has been extremely informative. I have to make a special thank you to Mr. Shakko Sen for a wonderful moderation of the session and summing up each speaker's comments so beautifully. It was a very, indeed a very good and enriching learning experience for us all, the legal perspective as well as the industrial perspective. We do have a common agenda here to make harmonized functioning of management and labor, which is a key for growth of the industry, and that has to be managed in the days to come. I believe the challenge to labor in the post-COVID, let us not call it a post-COVID because COVID is here to stay for another 2 years, at least in the near future. So let us call it a post-lockdown situation where it is going to be there. From Victor Moses and Company, from our law firm, for partners and associates, it was a privilege hosting this session with the Indian Chamber of Commerce. I now hand over to Ms. Shoma to kindly take on the proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Thank you, Mr. Roy. Thank you to all the panelists, especially to Justice Devanshu Boshak, Mr. Jishnu Shaha, Mr. Shakko Sen, Dr. Sen, Dr. Krishna Nirmala Sen, Mr. Prabal Mahapatra, and special thanks to Mr. Shubhajit Roy for putting together this very interesting and informative session. It has been the attempt of Indian Chamber of Commerce to organize such sessions which are really of benefit to industry. And this has been, since Mr. Mohapatra was also there, and our today's entire day has been dedicated to the tea industry. So this has also been an extension of the same, being another labor-intensive industry sector. So, thank you very much, and we look forward to having you back with us in our next session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot.